You think you can just walk away from everything we built? Just like that?
Everything we built? You built a prison and called it love.
Take your hands off what does not belong to you. That is the last time I will say it.
She never belonged to you either.
You do not have to do this. Step aside. This is not your fight.
You became my fight the night you walked into that store.
Choose. The word hit the warehouse like a gunshot. Ji-hoon's voice was low, controlled. The kind of controlled that was one breath away from completely falling apart. He stood at the far end of the warehouse with a gun in his right hand and 2 years of obsession burning in his eyes. And behind him were 12 Yeon faction men with their weapons raised and their patience running thin. And the Seoul rain was hammering the iron roof so hard it sounded like the sky itself was trying to break through. Choose right now, Amara. Him or me. She didn't move. Her hands were at her sides. Her heart was somewhere above her head. The warehouse smelled like rust and rain, and something electrical. The specific smell of a situation that was seconds away from becoming irreversible. And she stood in the center of it, between the man she had run from and the man she had run into. And she understood with the full terrible clarity of a woman who had survived too much to pretend anymore that this moment had been coming since the night she signed her name on 3 pages she did not read. Seojun stood 6 feet to her left. No weapon in his hands, no urgency in his posture. Just the absolute unnerving stillness of a man who had already calculated every exit in the room and was choosing not to take any of them. The dragon tattoo was visible on his right arm, where his jacket sleeve had torn in the fight that brought them all here. The single streak of blonde in his dark hair was damp with rain. He was breathing steadily. Everything about him said, I have been in worse rooms than this. Except his eyes. His eyes were on Amara. Not on Ji-hoon. Not on the 12 guns. Not on the doors. On her. Only her. And in those dark, carefully constructed, deliberately unreadable eyes, the eyes she had spent 6 weeks trying to decode, something was cracked open that she had never seen open before. He was afraid. Kang Seojun was afraid. And it was not the guns. It was not Ji-hoon. It was not the warehouse, or the rain, or the Yeon faction, or any of the things in this room that could actually kill him. It was her answer. I have been patient, Ji-hoon said, and his voice broke on the word patient in a way that revealed everything he had been trying to conceal. That this was not strategy. This was not leverage. This was a man who had confused destruction with devotion for so long he no longer knew where one ended and the other began. He took 1 step forward. 2 years, Amara. Everything I did because I love you. You know that. You have always known that. This man. He pointed the gun towards Seojun without looking at him because he could not stop looking at her. This man is a contract. A piece of paper. I am 2 years of your life. You are, Amara said quietly. Ji-hoon's face opened with something like relief. You are 2 years of my life, she said. 2 years of learning to apologize for things that were not my fault. 2 years of making myself smaller so you had more room. 2 years of checking your face before I decided how to feel about my own day. Her voice was not shaking. She had not known until this moment that it would not shake. You are 2 years that I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never repeat. The relief on Ji-hoon's face collapsed into something unrecognizable. The gun came up, and Seojun moved. He crossed the distance between them in the time it took for the sound of Ji-hoon's fury to leave his mouth, and his body was in front of hers, completely, deliberately, without hesitation. And the shot that Ji-hoon fired hit the iron pillar 2 feet to the left, because Seojun had already calculated the angle, and moved them both out of it in the same motion. His arm locked across her chest, his back to the gun, and she felt the full breadth of him absorbing the chaos of the room, while his hand found hers behind him and gripped it. Don't let go, he said. Quiet, just for her. She gripped back, and then his men came, through every door at once. Wherever you are watching this, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far a story about a woman who ran barefoot into a Seoul convenience store on the worst night of her life, signed the wrong document, and woke up married to the most dangerous man in the city, can travel. And if this story found you tonight at the exact moment you needed to be reminded that being truly seen is still possible, that it can find you when you are not looking, when you are soaking wet and out of options and just trying to survive one more night, then you already know you cannot leave now. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, because we are going all the way back to where this began. And by the time we return to this warehouse, you will feel every single second of what it cost her to say those words. 6 weeks before that warehouse. 6 weeks before any of it. Amara Okafor was running. The rain had no mercy in it that night. Cold and flat and relentless, turning every surface in Seoul into a dark mirror, blooming every streetlight into something that bled at the edges. She felt it hit her face, her shoulders, soaking through her silk dress within 30 seconds of stepping outside. And she did not stop, did not slow, did not look back at the building she had just walked out of for the last time. She had left one earring in. She noticed at the end of the street. She kept running. Her passport was pressed against her chest inside her dress. She had started keeping it there 3 months ago, the day she understood on a level beneath language what it meant to watch a man position himself in front of the only exit in a room when his voice was getting quiet. She had 60,001 crumpled in her left hand. She had her own 2 feet, and the specific invincibility of a woman who has finally made a decision she should have made a year ago. She had no plan. She had only the fierce animal certainty that if she stayed one more night, something in her would break that she would never find all the pieces of again. So she ran. Seoul at 2 a.m. was not empty. It was never empty. The convenience stores burned bright on every corner like fluorescent prayers, and Amara pushed into the first one she reached just to be somewhere warm, somewhere with walls, somewhere that did not know her name or the sound of her apologies. She moved to the back of the store, stood in the ramyeon aisle, and stared at rows of instant noodles because she needed something completely ordinary to put her eyes on. She stood there breathing, letting her heartbeat climb back down from her throat to where it belonged. The door opened behind her. 2 men in black suits walked in, dry, despite the rain outside. One on the phone, back partially toward her, voice clipped and controlled. The other clutching a document folder, moving through the pages with the visible panic of someone calculating the cost of a mistake in real time. He looked up. He looked at Amara. Something moved fast across his face. Assessment, decision, desperation. And he was crossing toward her before she could step back. The notary. Are you Kang Seojun? Please. He is already not pleased. 3 pages, very simple. You sign in 3 places and residential access is confirmed tonight as agreed. Please. Amara looked at the folder. She was wet and exhausted and had 60,001 and nowhere to sleep. She saw the words, apartment and resident and immediate access. She saw the small brass key in the envelope beside the folder. Her exhausted mind assembled those pieces into the only sentence it had the energy to believe. She signed 3 pages, her name and the date 3 times. She handed back the pen. The man, deflated with relief, pressed the key envelope into her hands, bowed quickly, retreated. The man on the phone never turned around once, not even slightly, as if the transaction happening 10 feet behind him was beneath his attention. Amara looked at the key in her hand. She bought instant coffee with her damp one. She left, 4 streets away. Narrow building sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a flower shop. 4th floor. Key turned cleanly in the lock. Inside was bare and quiet and smelled of nothing, which was exactly right. She sat on the floor against the wall beneath the window, drank her cold coffee, and stopped running. She was asleep before she finished it. She woke to her own name said like a verdict that had already been delivered. Amara Okafor, 26, Lagos, Nigeria, Seoul resident, fashion designer, no criminal record. 6 men in black stood in the apartment, all of them still in the specific way that her body recognized as dangerous before her brain finished waking up. Morning light was pouring hard through the uncurtained window and falling across all of them and landing finally on the man sitting at her kitchen table, holding her instant coffee cup, which he had apparently found and used, reading. from a document folder with the unhurried focus of someone who had been there long enough to get comfortable. She understood him in pieces because that was the only safe way to take in a man like that all at once. The hands first, folded now on the table, calm, a dragon tattoo coiling up his right forearm, disappearing under a pushback sleeve. The face, jawline sharp enough to have been decided, a mouth set in a line that gave absolutely nothing away. Then the eyes, dark and measuring and completely, deliberately still. And through the jet black of his hair, one streak of blonde catching the morning light like the single soft thing he had forgotten to put away. He looked at her with the patience of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to end. "You signed my marriage contract," he said. Amara sat up from the floor slowly. Her afro was compressed on one side. She was still in the damp silk dress. She looked at him across the small room with the direct gaze of a woman who had survived last night and was not about to be undone by this morning. "I signed a residential agreement," she said. "You signed 3 pages that my assistant pulled from the wrong folder in a moment of panic." He turned the document on the table toward her. Her own signature looked back at her 3 times. "Pages 2 and 3 are a marriage registration, filed and processed by 6 a.m. A pause. "My name is Kang Seojun." She studied him carefully. "Am I supposed to know that name?" Something moved briefly through his expression. "Most people in Seoul do. I'm not from Seoul." "I know exactly where you are from," he said simply. He gestured across the table. "Sit down. We need to discuss your situation." She sat. Not because he told her to, because she chose to. He laid the arrangement out with the clean, direct precision of a man who had been running complex operations since before he was legally permitted to. The Kang Syndicate, he said it without apology, watching her face, was in the middle of a negotiation with the Yon faction over territorial boundaries that had been bleeding for 2 years. The truce agreement required a verified domestic partnership from the syndicate head. He had arranged one. The woman had cancelled, his assistant had panicked, and Amara Okafor had walked into a convenience store on the worst night of her life and signed her name in 3 places. "So you need a wife," she said, "for 6 months. 2 or 3 public appearances, a dinner, photographs, nothing beyond what I have described. And in return, this apartment, furnished and stocked, a monthly payment." He named a number. She kept her face completely still. "Your visa secured without further complications, and—" A pause, measured, deliberate. "The man whose handprints are still visible on your arm will not come within 3 streets of you for as long as you carry my name." The room went very quiet. He had done his research before she even opened her eyes. "How do you know about—" "I make it my business to know relevant information," he said. Not cruelly, as fact. His dark eyes held hers without wavering. "You were not difficult to find, Amara. Neither was he." She thought about Jihoon, about standing in front of a door that had been blocked by a body and a voice that had gone very quiet, about 60,001 and 1 earring, and the passport she had been sleeping with pressed against her chest for 3 months. 6 months, she said. 6 months. "I keep working. My label does not stop for any of this. I wouldn't expect it to. I need a real studio, north-facing light, full cutting table, wall shelving, a dress form, size 8. Done before Thursday. And at 6 months we file. Clean exit. Everything promised, delivered. We do not speak again." He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than the agreement required. Something in his expression moved and settled. "That is the offer," he said. She stood, straight-backed, chin level, the full composure of a woman who had decided that circumstances did not get to determine her posture. "Then we have a deal, Kang Seojun." He rose as she rose, automatically, a reflex that ran deeper than his reputation. And she stored that detail away without deciding yet what to do with it. "My men will have the penthouse ready this afternoon," he said. "I need my fabric samples first. I'll go myself. I'll send—" "I know his schedule," she said, and she looked at Seojun with the level eyes of a woman who had spent 2 years becoming an expert in the geography of one specific threat. "I know when he is in that apartment and when he is not. I have been navigating this longer than you have been aware of it. Send 2 men if you must. They stay outside. He looked at her for a long second. She watched him recalculate. 2 men, he said, outside. She walked to the door, stopped, turned back. You drank my coffee, she said. He looked at the empty cup on the table, then at her. Something that was not quite a reaction passed across his face. She left. He sent 2 men. She was in and out of Jihoon's apartment in 18 minutes, and did not look at the room she was leaving for the last time. The penthouse sat on the 32nd floor of a Gangnam tower, and the city below it looked like every ambitious thing Seoul had ever promised itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls. Furniture chosen with the restraint of someone who understood that quality and excess were completely different things. Serious and beautiful, and waiting for something to warm it. Mrs. Park showed her the studio. North-facing, large, empty and full of possibility at the same time. Amara walked to the center of it, pressed her bare foot to the clean hardwood, and decided that a space could still belong to her even when the circumstances around it did not. That first dinner was the 2 of them at a table built for 10, the city glittering 32. Floors below, the quiet of 2 people who have agreed to terms and are waiting to discover what those terms feel like, in practice sitting between them like weather. He stood when she came in. That same reflex. She sat without acknowledging it, but she noticed it, and she filed it carefully. Rules, she said, without looking up from her bowl. Tell me all of them now. Everything you expect from me. He set down his chopsticks. He told her. No leaving after 10 without informing his team. Within arm's reach at public appearances. No discussion of syndicate business with anyone. No contact with Jihoon under any circumstance or for any reason. She nodded at each one. At the last one, she looked up and held his eyes. That one, she said quietly. You never need to say to me twice. He held her gaze for a beat longer than the agreement required. Then we understand each other, he said. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. More settled, like 2 people who had decided without discussing it that they were both going to take this seriously. She broke the first rule at 8:59 the following morning. Fabric supplier at Dongdaemun. Hand-dyed material from Ogun State that waited for nobody's permission structure. She took the subway like a person. Chose between 2 weights of silk with her hands because that was the only correct way to choose silk. Bought tteokbokki from a street stall on the way back because it smelled like it had been made by someone who understood their exact purpose in the world. She came back to find Seojun in the main room, jacket on, eyes on the elevator when it opened. You left, he said. Fabric supplier, time sensitive. She crossed the room and set 1 container of tteokbokki on his desk beside whatever he had been reviewing. Your men were outside the entire time. They looked cold and hungry. You should feed them better. He looked at the tteokbokki. He looked at her, afro full and completely free around. Her face, her own African print design draped over her shoulder. Chin at the specific angle that communicated she had broken a rule and had made her peace with that. He picked up the tteokbokki. He ate it. He said nothing about the rule. She walked to her studio and waited until the door was fully closed before she smiled. 6 days later, the building's lobby became a problem. She was coming back from signing for a fabric delivery herself, because the courier was new and she did not trust anyone else with the packaging, when 2 men stepped out of the stairwell. Wrong suits, wrong energy, the specific stillness of men who were not waiting but positioning. Amara Okafor, the first one said. She turned to move and the second one cut the angle, and then the lobby door opened and Junho was there, and 2 more of Seojun's men behind him, and what followed was fast and brutal and decisive. Junho put the first man down with an efficiency that was almost architectural. The second man swung at nothing and was on the floor before he finished the motion. 11 seconds. She counted without deciding to count. Junho straightened his jacket. He looked at her with the careful professional composure of a man trained to treat extraordinary situations as routine. Are you hurt? No, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Good. Please go upstairs. She went upstairs and found Seojun at the penthouse door when the elevator opened. He had clearly been informed mid-meeting. Jacket half on, phone still in his hand. And he was looking at her with that expression she was learning to read. controlled on the surface and something enormous and hot moving underneath it. "I'm not hurt," she said before he could speak. He looked at her anyway. Her hands, her face, her arms, checking each one, cataloguing, the way he always did when she had been too close to something that could have hurt her. "They were Yon," he said, "I gathered. They came through Jihoon." She said nothing, which was its own answer. She walked past him into the penthouse. She set her fabric delivery on the kitchen counter. She stood there with both palms flat on the marble, breathing steadily, making herself be steady, and she heard him come in and stop behind her. "Amara, I'm fine. You're allowed to not be fine." She turned around. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen looking at her with something in his face that was not the careful professional distance he usually maintained between them. Something more direct. Something that did not have a business reason behind it and was not trying to pretend it did. "I have been not fine before," she said quietly. "This is manageable." Not fine and manageable are not the same thing. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. The city hummed outside 32 floors below. Seojun. "What?" "Thank you for Junho being there." "Junho is always there," he said. Then, quieter, more deliberate, "I am always there." The kitchen held that sentence between them for a long moment before either of them moved. She looked away first. The first public appearance was 10 days into the arrangement. A private dinner in Itaewon, a restaurant with no sign on its exterior, and a door that opened only for those expected. Amara wore something she had been building before any of this. Deep wine-red silk with adia detailing at the neckline, cut close through the body and open all the way down her back, her locks pinned up with gold thread she had woven in herself that afternoon. Her brown skin in the mirror was lit from somewhere inside. She looked like a woman who existed entirely on her own terms and had the documentation to prove it. Seojun met her at the elevator. He was in black. He was always in black. Collar open slightly, the crane tattoo just visible at the back of his neck. He looked at her when the elevator doors opened, and something started to happen in his expression before he put it deliberately and firmly back in its place. "You look..." He stopped. "Appropriate?" she offered. "Yes," he said, to the air just past her left ear. "That." She kept the smile entirely internal all the way to the car. The dinner had 5 guests, 3 faction representatives and their wives. And Amara understood within 10 minutes that every single person at that table was performing a version of themselves that left the most dangerous parts out, that the food was completely incidental to the information being carefully not exchanged across it, and that Seojun was the stillest person in the room, which was exactly why he was the most powerful one. She watched the way other men's sentences tilted toward him before they finished. She watched his responses land half a beat slower than expected, always more precise, always arriving somewhere the other person had not been aiming. She watched him and thought, "I understand exactly what you are doing, and I think you are extraordinary at it." A man to Seojun's left, older, broad, the specific confidence of someone who had not been meaningfully challenged in too long, turned to Amara midway through the second course, with a smile that was doing 2 things at the same time. "You are the wife," he said in English, putting weight on the word to make sure she heard what was underneath it. It is surprising. Seojun has always been very specific in his choices. She heard everything inside that sentence. She had been hearing beneath sentences her entire life. She set her chopsticks down with precise, unhurried care. She turned to the man with a smile that was warm and wide, and as sharp as a surgical cut at the edges. "Specific is exactly right," she said pleasantly. "When Kang Seojun chooses something, it is because he has seen what everyone else has missed. I have always found that the most reliable kind of judgment, haven't you?" She held his eyes for exactly 1 second past comfortable. "But please, tell me about your operation. I find large-scale coordination so fascinating. All those moving parts that have to work together." The man laughed, loud and slightly displaced. He moved on and never addressed Amara Okafor as a footnote again for the remainder of the evening. Seojun did not look at her, but his hand, resting on the table beside her place setting, moved 2 centimeters in her direction. She noticed. She stored it. In the car afterward, Seoul running past the windows in long rivers of light, he said, "I told you not to speak unless spoken to." "He spoke to me first," she said. 4 full seconds of silence. The corner of his mouth moved. She had been waiting for it since the restaurant. "Don't make a habit of it," he said. "I make no promises," she said. He turned to the window. The corner of his mouth was still there. She turned to her own window and let the warmth moving through her chest be what it was for once without immediately interrogating it. It was the 3rd week when he found the bruises. She was in her studio late, deep inside a new collection the way she only got deep into work when something in it was genuinely alive. Cutting patterns by the warm glow of the work light. The studio door propped open because the room got hot, and she liked hearing the penthouse breathing around her at night. She reached for a bolt of rust-colored silk on the high shelf, and her sleeve fell back. She did not notice. She heard him in the doorway. Turned. He was standing with one hand on the doorframe and his eyes were on her arm. On the bruising that was weeks old and yellowing but still completely readable in the work light. Still unmistakably the shape of a grip. High on the upper arm. The specific topography of a hand that had decided not to release. She saw him see it. She pulled her sleeve down immediately. "Don't," she said. "It is old. He cannot reach me here. Do not let this ruin tonight because tonight was a good work night and I do not have enough of those right now." Seojun stood in the doorway. Something was happening beneath his controlled surface, that he was working enormously hard to keep from reaching his face. His jaw was tight. The dragon tattoo and the wave tattoo were both visible on his arms. His eyes came up from her arm to her face, and they were not controlled at all. "I am not looking at you," he said. Low, careful. The absolute steadiness of something enormous being held still by force of will. "I am memorizing a name." She opened her mouth. She closed it. He left. 30 seconds later, she heard him in the hallway, on the phone, speaking in a register she had never heard from him before. Lower than his professional voice. Older than everything else about him. The voice of something that had been patient for a very long time, and had just stopped being patient. She stood in her studio with the fabric in her hands, and she thought about what being taken care of had felt like before this. She thought about Ji-hoon, who had paid for things and given things, and held every single gift, like a receipt he expected her to honor on his timeline. She thought about the architecture of that, how it had looked like love from certain angles, and felt like an accumulating debt from the inside. This was not that. She pressed her back against the work table. She stood in the warm light of her studio, and she allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to feel something without immediately checking whether it was safe. By morning, Ji-hoon's accounts were frozen, his visa status flagged, his name quietly and efficiently closed out of every building in Seoul that had ever had a conversation with Kang Seojun. Mrs. Park mentioned it at breakfast without making eye contact. Amara said nothing. That night she forgot to lock her bedroom door. She didn't realize it for 3 days. When she did not lock it. 4 days after the bruised discovery, Ji-hoon made his first direct move. Amara was at a Dongdaemun market, 2 of Seojun's men at a careful distance, the arrangement they had settled into. When she felt the hand land on her arm, not grabbing, just landing, familiar in the way of something that used to have permission and was pretending it still did. She turned. Ji-hoon stood behind her in the middle of the busy market. He was not holding weapons. He was not surrounded by men. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, the specific brand from the Pojangmacha on Insadong Street, the one she used to stop at every Sunday morning before everything went wrong. And for one disorienting second, she saw him the way she had seen him in the beginning. Before. The man who had memorized her coffee order. Who had learned 3 words of Yoruba just to make her laugh on a bad day. Who had held her hand at Incheon arrivals when she first landed in this city, and made it feel like arriving somewhere safe. She remembered all of that in 1 second, and then she remembered everything that came after. "I just want to talk," he said. His voice was careful. His eyes were the soft version. The version she had once trusted completely. She pulled her arm back. "Don't touch me. Amara, look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like someone who..." Don't touch me, Jihoon. His voice dropped lower. You think he's protecting you. He is using you. At least what I felt was real. Whatever you think is happening up there in that penthouse, it has an expiry date and you know it. Step back. I still know you, he said. And the way he said it, quiet and certain, the way he said everything he believed, made something complicated move through her chest that she did not want to name. Better than he does. Better than he ever will. He reached for her arm again, and that was when Seojun's man moved from across the market stall and placed himself between them with one smooth step that required no words. Jihoon looked at the man, then at Amara. The soft version of his face hardened into something else entirely, wounded and furious and calculating, all three arriving at the same time. This is not finished, he said quietly. His eyes found hers past the man's shoulder. I will always come back. You know that about me. Then he turned and walked into the crowd and was gone. She stood very still. She thought about the coffee cups, about Insadong Street on Sunday mornings, about the specific grief of loving the version of someone that existed before you understood what they were capable of. Then she picked up her fabric samples and walked back to the car without her hands shaking, which was the thing she was most proud of for the rest of that day. Seojun already knew by the time she got back. She walked into the penthouse to find him standing in the main room with the specific stillness of someone who had received information and was deciding what to do with the feeling it produced. I'm fine, she said before he could speak. He touched you, Seojun said. Not loud, just weighted in a way that made the air in the room feel different. His man stepped in immediately. He touched you. He said it again, and it meant something larger the second time. His eyes were on her face doing the thing she found most difficult to meet. The thing where his control slipped just enough that she could see all the way to the back of him. Seojun, tell me you are fine and mean it, he said. Not performing it. Actually mean it. She stopped. She looked at him standing in the middle of his own penthouse with the dragon on his right arm and the waves on his left and the chrysanthemum hidden over his heart. And she understood that nobody, not one person in 2 years, had ever made that specific distinction for her. I'm frightened, she said quietly. Not of him, of how familiar it felt, how automatic it was to freeze. I hated that my body remembered. The room was completely still. Seojun crossed toward her. Slowly, deliberately, he stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. He looked down at her with an expression she still did not have one complete word for. Protective and furious and tender all in the same space. Your body was keeping you alive, he said. That is not weakness. That is survival. Her throat tightened. She had not expected that sentence. Not from any man. His hand came up slowly, and he pressed the back of his fingers to her cheek. Barely there, barely real. And she did not step back. She let herself feel the warmth of it, the extraordinary specific gentleness of it from a man whose hands had been tight with fury on her behalf 60 seconds ago. He dropped his hand, stepped back, reassembled the distance between them. Stay out of the markets without me, he said. His voice was professional again. Your men were. Without me, Amara. Underneath the controlled register, she heard what the sentence actually was. Not a rule, not a command. A plea. She nodded. He walked to his office. She stood in the main room with 2 fingers pressed to the cheek he had touched and stared at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows and understood that the arrangement had stopped being an arrangement some time ago without either of them announcing it. The fight came 3 days later, and it came directly into the penthouse. Seojun was in a meeting in the main room when the sound changed. A sharp instruction. Movement. Then the particular quality of silence that precedes violence. The silence of trained men repositioning. She should have stayed in her studio. She knew enough about this world by now to know she absolutely should have stayed. She opened the door anyway. 2 Yeon men had gotten past the lobby security and were in the main room, and what she saw when she stepped into the corridor was Seojun already moving. Not repositioning, not calculating, moving. The first man came from the left, and Seojun turned into the swing rather than away from it, taking the force on his shoulder and using the man's own momentum to drive him sideways and hard into the wall, with a sound that left no ambiguity about the outcome. The second man reached for a weapon, and Junho was already there, fast and clean, and that was over in 4 seconds. 11 seconds total. She had counted again. She still did not know why she counted. Seojun straightened, adjusted his collar, turned and found her in the corridor doorway with her hand on the frame and her eyes wider than she intended. "I told you to stay in the studio," he said. "You didn't tell me anything. You didn't know I was standing there. I knew exactly where you were standing." She looked at the men being removed efficiently by Junho's team, then back at Seojun. There was a cut along his left cheekbone, fresh, the kind that came from moving into something rather than away from it. "You're bleeding," she said. He touched his cheek with 2 fingers, looked at them, minimally. "Sit down. Amara, sit down. Please." He sat. She came back from the kitchen with a damp cloth and she stood in front of him in the chair, her standing, and pressed it carefully to his cheekbone. He sat completely still. He was looking up at her and his dark eyes were tracking her face with something that had not had time to get its armor back on. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know I don't," she said. "Hold still." She cleaned the cut. She was close enough to feel his breathing. When he exhaled, the warmth of it reached her collarbone and she kept her eyes on the cut and her hands steady, and told herself firmly that the warmth spreading through her chest was proximity, and nothing more than that. "It's not deep," she said. "I know. You should have moved away from the swing. Moving away would have given him the angle on you." She stopped cleaning. She looked down from his cheek to his eyes. That was the mistake. He was looking at her with the uncontrolled expression, the one she could see all the way to the back of, and it said everything he had not said out loud in 4 weeks. She straightened, stepped back, handed him the cloth. "Don't do that again," she said. "Move into the swing." "Get hurt," she said, and she turned and walked to her studio before he could see her face doing what it was doing. 2 nights later, she could not sleep. She had been working late, but the pattern was finished and the studio was quiet, and the penthouse was quiet, and the city below was doing its permanent, luminous hum, and she could not settle. She put down her pencil. She walked out to the main room and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at Seoul spread below her. 32 floors of other people's lives, other people's decisions, and she thought about how she had arrived in this city, with nothing except the decision to survive, and had somehow ended up here, in this space, becoming something she did not have a name for yet. She heard him behind. Her. She did not turn around immediately. She knew his footsteps by now, the specific weight of them, the particular silence that came before them when he was moving carefully so as not to startle her. "Can't sleep," he said. "Thinking," she said. He came to stand beside her at the window, not close enough to touch, just present. Both of them looking at the city below, the light of it moving across the glass. "What are you thinking?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking that 3 weeks ago I was running barefoot in the rain with 60,000 won, and I thought that was the worst night of my life." She paused. "I'm not sure it was." He turned to look at her. She kept looking at the city. "The night before it," she said quietly. "The night before I ran. That was the worst night." She stopped. Started again. "I had been making excuses for a long time, and I ran out of them. And I remember thinking, if I stay one more night, the version of me that knows she deserves better will be gone completely, and I will not get her back." The window was very quiet. "You got her back," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with those open eyes, the unguarded ones, the ones she had been cataloguing since the 2nd week. And the blonde streak was falling forward, and the chrysanthemum was beneath his shirt, and they were close. Closer than she had registered in the dark. "Seojun," she said. She was not entirely certain why she said it. He looked at her for a long moment, Then he reached out, and with the back of 2 fingers he pushed one loose curl back from her forehead, barely touching. The lightest possible contact. His knuckles against her temple and then gone. "Go to sleep, Amara," he said quietly. His voice was careful in a way that told her exactly how much it was costing him to say that sentence, instead of something else. She looked at him for one more moment. She understood what he had just chosen not to do. She understood what it meant that he had chosen not to do it. She went to bed. She lay there in the dark and pressed 2 fingers to her temple where his knuckles had been, and she stared at the ceiling and thought, tomorrow, or the day after, or soon, because neither of them was going to be able to keep choosing not to for very much longer. She was right. The kiss happened on a Wednesday night and neither of them planned it. It had been a difficult day. A supplier in Lagos gone quiet on a commission she needed, a pattern that refused to resolve itself. And underneath all of it, the low, persistent hum of a life that was hers, but was not entirely hers yet. She worked until midnight. Then she gave up and went to the kitchen for water. He was already there, jacket off, sleeves pushed back, the dragon tattoo and the waves and the calligraphy all visible in the low kitchen light. He had a glass of water and a document he had clearly been reading and set down when she came in. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was in a short silk robe and her afro was loose, and she was clearly not having her finest night, and she thought, fine. Let him see all of it. Let him see something real for once. Bad day, he said. Difficult, she said. She moved to the cabinet for a glass. The Lagos client, he said. She stopped. She turned. How do you know about the Lagos client? Mrs. Park mentioned you were distracted at dinner. Mrs. Park should consider minding her own affairs. Mrs. Park minds mine. That is what I pay her for. The corner of his mouth moved. What happened? She filled her glass, leaned back against the counter, looked at him across the small kitchen and decided to answer honestly, because she was tired of performing fineness. He pulled the commission, found a designer in Lagos who costs less and doesn't need international shipping, which is completely reasonable. She paused, which doesn't make it hurt less. Seojun was quiet for a moment. Then, your work is worth the shipping. You have never seen my work. I walk past your studio every night, he said simply. I have been looking at your work for 4 weeks. The Lagos client is a fool, and will understand that eventually. She stared at him. He said it the way he said everything. Without decoration, without performing the compliment. Like a fact he had verified and was reporting. She felt something tilt slowly inside her chest. The way something tilts when a door that has been moving on its hinge for a long time finally swings open. She crossed the kitchen to put her glass in the sink. He was closer than she calculated. The kitchen was not large, and neither of them had been monitoring the geometry. And she stopped with only inches between them. And the warmth he carried was right there. And she thought about the window last night, his knuckles against her temple. The sentence he had chosen to say, instead of the one she had heard underneath it. His eyes in the low light were not controlled at all. They were open in the way they were only open when he forgot to close them. Seojun, she said. Just his name. He lifted one hand and pressed the back of his fingers to her cheek, with a slowness that gave her every opportunity to step back. The touch was barely there, his knuckles against her cheekbone, the dragon tattoo at the edge of her vision. And he looked at her face with the eyes of a man who had found a door and was waiting to see if it would open. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. That was all he needed. He kissed her with the full, deliberate attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. His hand moved from her cheek to her jaw and into her hair, his fingers spreading through her afro, and she gripped the front of his shirt because she needed something solid to hold while everything around her reorganized itself. He kissed her like she was the answer to a question he had been sitting with for longer than 4 weeks, like she was something he had been choosing not to reach for until the choosing had become impossible. And she kissed him back with all the honesty she had been keeping in careful storage because she had not known until right now that there was anywhere safe to put it. When they finally separated, the kitchen was completely still. He rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. The blonde streak had fallen forward. She could feel his breath against her lips and his hand was still in her hair, and neither of them spoke because anything they said would make this smaller than what it was, and it was already the largest thing that had happened to her in a very long time. Then his phone rang. The sound cut through the kitchen like a stone through glass. He pulled back. His hand left her hair slowly. He looked at her for one long, open, unguarded second. Something completely real and unfinished in his face. And then he picked up the phone and walked to the far end of the kitchen, and his voice was professional again. The surface assembled back into place with the speed of long practice. Amara Okafor stood at the counter. She pressed her fingers gently to her lips. She stayed there for a moment, listening to the rain that had started again outside, the city doing its permanent humming 32 floors below, and she thought about the chrysanthemum over his heart, the burial flower, the grave he had placed over the part of himself that was capable of this. And she thought quietly, and with complete certainty, you buried it too soon. She went back to her studio. She sat at her work table. She looked at the unresolved pattern in front of her and picked up her pencil, and within 20 minutes had found exactly what it needed, because something in her that had been held carefully closed had opened, and everything that came through that opening was warm and clear and certain. Outside the kitchen window, Seoul kept moving, indifferent and luminous. And somewhere in the penthouse, Kang Seojun finished his phone call and stood alone in the kitchen for a long time before he moved. The morning after the kiss, neither of them mentioned it. That was the agreement they made without words. The specific, unspoken agreement of two people who understand that naming something too soon can crack it before it has the chance to become what it is trying to become. Amara came to breakfast. Seojun was already at the table. Mrs. Park moved between them with the diplomatic invisibility of a woman who noticed everything and commented on nothing. They ate. They spoke about ordinary things, a delivery she was expecting, a meeting he had in the afternoon, whether the studio needed a second work light on the north wall. They did not speak about the kitchen, but when she reached across the table for the pepper and her hand brushed his, neither of them pulled back immediately. 3 full seconds. Neither of them acknowledged that either. They were careful with each other that morning. The specific carefulness of two people who have discovered that the thing between them is larger than the container they built for it. Every look held a half-second longer than necessary. Every proximity in the hallway, every reaching for the same door, registered in a way it had not before Wednesday night. She was in her studio by 9. She could hear him down the hall, the low, measured cadence of his voice on calls, the particular silence when he was reading. And she realized she had learned the sound of him, the specific texture of his presence in a space. She had learned it the way you learn things you had been paying close attention to, without admitting you were paying attention. He left for his meeting at noon. He stopped at the door and turned back and looked at her across the length of the penthouse. She was at her studio doorway with a pencil behind her ear and fabric draped over both forearms. And he looked at her for 2 full seconds without saying anything. Then he left. She stood in the doorway for a moment after the elevator closed. She went back to work smiling and did not try to stop it. 2 days after the kiss, Ji-hoon called her. She did not know how he had gotten the number. She was deep in her studio when the phone rang. Unknown Korean number. And she answered without thinking, and his voice came through the line like a door opening in a wall she had believed was sealed. "I need you to hear me," he said. No greeting, no pretense. Just his voice stripped down to the thing underneath it that had always been the most dangerous part of him, his certainty. Not as someone you are afraid of, as someone who knows you, the real you, before all of this. She stood very still with the fabric still in her hands. "I know what the Kang Syndicate is," Ji-hoon continued. "I know what kind of world you are living inside right now. And I know that what you feel in there feels real because you are too close to it to see it, clearly. He is using the contract to keep you comfortable. Comfortable is not the same as safe. You know that. You learned that from me. Ji-hoon, I am not calling to threaten you. I am calling because nobody else is going to tell you the truth about what that man is. Stop. Amara. Stop." Her voice was not shaking, not loud. the voice of a woman who had spent 2 years having her own perception managed and had made herself a promise about that. You do not get to define my reality anymore. Not from a distance, not in person, not ever again. Do not call this number. She ended the call. She stood there with her hands flat on the work table, and she thought about what he had said, not because she believed it, but because she had promised herself she would always think, always ask the question, never again mistake the comfort of certainty for the work of actually knowing. So she asked the question. She held it honestly. She thought about Seojun, who had stood between her and a gun without calculating whether it was worth it. Who had memorized Jihoon's name like a decision? Who had said your body was keeping you alive? That is not weakness. That is survival. Without being asked, without needing credit for it. Because it was simply true and he thought she should know it. She picked up the phone. She walked to his office. She knocked once and opened the door. He looked up from his desk. Jihoon called me, she said. I don't know how he got the number. I ended it immediately. I'm telling you because I said I would always tell you things that matter. Seojun was quiet. His eyes moved across her face, reading it the way he always read it, patient and complete. Are you all right? He said. Yes. A pause. He said you would use me until the contract ended and then I would be a liability. And? She met his eyes directly. I'm standing in your office telling you about the call instead of keeping it from you. I think that answers his argument better than anything I could say. Something moved through Seojun's expression, warm and restrained at the same time. The combination she had come to know as what he looked like when he was feeling something he had not given himself permission to feel fully. I'll have the number blocked, he said. I already did, she said. She turned to go. Amara. She stopped, turned back. He was looking at her. The chrysanthemum was beneath his shirt. The crane was at the back of his neck. He looked like a man deciding how much of himself to spend. Thank you, he said, for telling me. She nodded once. She left. She did not see the way he looked at the closed door after she was gone. She did not need to. She already knew. The second kiss was nothing like the first. The first had been a Wednesday, slow and careful, built from weeks of proximity and the gravity of two people trying not to fall. The second was a Thursday evening, and it was not careful at all. She had been in her studio when she heard his voice in the hallway. Not his professional voice, not his meeting voice, but the register she had only heard twice before, and both times it had meant something was wrong. She came to the studio doorway. He was on the phone, his back to her, his left hand at the back of his neck. A gesture she had never seen from him before. The gesture of a man keeping himself from doing something, and the wave tattoo on his forearm shifting as his hand moved. He ended the call, turned, saw her. What happened? She said. The Yon faction has moved up their timeline, he said. The truce negotiation collapsed an hour ago. Baek Chan-ho walked out of the meeting. A pause, deliberate and heavy. Which means the clause that requires our marriage to be visible and verifiable is void. She understood immediately. The 6 months. The contract has no standing if the truce falls through. He looked at her steadily. You are free to leave, Amara. Tonight if you want. Everything I promised. The payment, the visa, the apartment. It is all still yours. You held up your side. What happened with the Yon faction is not your problem. The hallway was very quiet. She looked at him standing in the corridor of his own penthouse, telling her she could leave. And she thought about the first morning she had woken up here. The city below. The studio that had become hers. The table where they had eaten dinner every night for 6 weeks. She thought about the tteokbokki on his desk, and the corner of his mouth in the car, and his hand in her hair in the kitchen, and the way he had looked at her from the door that afternoon, with 2 full seconds of silence, saying everything he had not said out loud. She thought about the chrysanthemum. Is that what you want? She said. For me to leave? He looked at her for a long time. What I want, he said carefully, is not part of the original agreement. I'm not asking about the original agreement. The hallway held its breath. No, he said, low and certain and completely unguarded. It is not what I want. She crossed the hallway in 4 steps, and she kissed him first this time. And it was nothing like the kitchen. It was immediate and certain, and her hands were on his face. And his arms came around her, and he kissed her back with everything he kept below the surface. Everything controlled and contained and banked low that she had been catching glimpses of for 6 weeks. And it came through in the kiss like a current, deep and real and not careful at all. When they finally stopped, his forehead was against hers, and his arms were still fully around her, and her hands were still on his face, and neither of them moved. Stay, he said, quietly, just the one word. I was never going to leave, she said. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the warehouse, afraid of her answer. Except this time the answer was already there in her hands on his face, and the warmth in her eyes, and the fact that she had crossed the hallway first. He kissed her again, softer this time. The kind of kiss that was not a beginning but a confirmation. The kind that said, I believe you. The kind that said, I am not going anywhere either. That night she did not go back to her room. She was not sure which of them made the decision, and it did not matter. What mattered was the way he held her, carefully, completely, like something he had not expected to be allowed to hold and was not taking for granted for a single second of it. His hands were gentle in the specific, deliberate way of a man who understood the difference between strength and force, who understood that gentleness was not the absence of power, but the most controlled expression of it. And she felt the full distance between being held by him and every version of being held that had come before. The distance was enormous. It was the distance between a cage and an open hand. She pressed her face against the chrysanthemum on his chest at some point in the dark. She felt it beneath her cheek, the flower he had put there as a burial, and she thought, not anymore. She pressed her palm flat against it intentionally, like a statement, like a claim she was making on behalf of both of them, and she felt his breathing shift beneath her hand. I can feel you thinking, he said into her hair. His voice was different in the dark, lower. The version of him that only existed without an audience. I think loudly, she said. I know. A pause. What are you thinking? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul hummed its permanent hum. The city indifferent and luminous 32 floors below. The same city that had been indifferent and luminous the night she ran through it barefoot with 60,001 and one earring. And the distance between that night and this one was the longest and shortest journey she had ever taken. I'm thinking that I signed 3 pages I didn't read, she said, and it turned out to be the most accurate document I've ever put my name on. She felt his chest rise. She felt something that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood, warm and quiet and real, and she stored the sound of it carefully because she understood it was rare and she was going to want it later. He pulled her closer. She let herself be pulled. And for the first time in a very long time, maybe the first time ever if she was honest, she fell asleep without checking the exits first. In the morning she woke before him. She lay in the early Seoul light, and she looked at the dragon coiling up his right arm, and the waves on his left, and the crane she could just see at the back of his neck. And she thought about the passport she'd been sleeping with pressed against her chest for 3 months, and how she had not thought about it once in 3 weeks. He opened his eyes. He found her watching him. Something moved across his face, slow and unguarded, the expression of a man who had woken up expecting one world and found a better one. And it was the most honest thing she had seen in a very long time. Good morning, she said. He reached over and pushed one loose curl back from her face. His fingers were careful. His eyes were open. He said nothing, and it was exactly the right thing. She pressed her hand against the chrysanthemum one more time before she got up. He looked down at her hand on his chest, and then back at her face, and his expression did the thing she had no complete word for yet. Protective and tender and certain all at once. She got up. She made coffee. She brought 2 cups back and set one on his side and sat cross-legged on her side with hers, and they drank their coffee while the city woke up below. And it was the most ordinary, extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her. The peace lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, Junho called at 6 a.m., and Amara woke to Seojun already dressed, already on the phone, already the operational version of himself, precise and cold and moving, standing at the window with Seoul just beginning to light up in the early grey. She sat up. He turned, and the expression on his face told her everything before he said a word. "Jihoon took one of my men last night," he said. "Junho's team found him this morning. He is alive. Barely." A pause. "Jihoon left a message. For you." She got out of bed. What did it say? Seojun's jaw tightened. He looked at his phone, then at her. "Tell her I am still waiting. Tell her I am running out of patience." The room was completely still. "He is escalating," she said. "Yes. Because of us." "Yes." She stood in the middle of the room and she thought about Jihoon. Not the version she had loved, not the version that had hurt her, but this version, the one that sent messages through beaten men, the one that had made deals with the Yon faction, the one that stood in a market with 2 cups of coffee performing the ghost of something he had destroyed himself. She thought about what this version was capable of, and she did not look away from the answer. "What do we do?" she said. She had said "we" without thinking. She watched him hear it, watched the word land in his expression, and settle there like something he had been waiting for. "We draw him out," Seojun said, "on my terms, not his. I have been reacting to him, and that ends today." He crossed the room toward her and stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the early morning cold. He looked at her face with the full, focused attention of the man she knew underneath the reputation. "I need you to trust me completely. Everything I tell you to do, you do it. No exceptions." "I trust you," she said. Not because the arrangement required it, because she meant it with everything she had. He lifted his hand and pressed it once to her cheek. Briefly, warm, completely. And then he was back on the phone and the operation was already in motion. The plan was the gala, a charity event 3 nights away, the kind of Seoul social occasion that the city's powerful attended because being absent was its own kind of statement. Seojun had already been expected. Amara would go as his wife, visibly and publicly, in a way that would reach Jihoon within hours through every eye he had placed in the city's social layer. It was bait. They both understood it was bait. She spent 2 days building the dress. It was the most extraordinary thing she had made since she arrived in Seoul. Black silk. True black. The kind that absorbed light rather than threw it back. Cut to follow every line of her body, with hand-embroidered gold dada detailing at the collar and hem that she worked through both nights. When she put it on and stood before the studio mirror, she looked like a woman who had decided the city was going to remember her. Mrs. Park stood in the doorway. She pressed both hands together and said nothing, which said everything. Seojun was waiting at the elevator when she came out. He turned when he heard her, and he looked at her, and this time he did not put the expression away. He let it stay on his face. All of it, the full, unconstrained version, the one that lived below the controlled surface. And she looked back at him in his black suit with the blonde streak and the crane just visible above his collar, and she thought, whatever comes tonight, we are going to come through it. I know that the way I know the weight of fabric in my hands. You are extraordinary, he said. I know, she said. The corner of her mouth moved. Are you ready? No, he said honestly. Then he offered her his arm. Let's go. The gala occupied the full ground and first floors of a Gangnam building whose lobby alone could have swallowed the convenience store where all of this had started. Chandeliers, marble, the particular charged hum of 200 people performing their most polished versions of themselves, simultaneously. Amara walked in on Seojun's arm and felt the room shift. The subtle seismic adjustment of people noticing, recalibrating, deciding what to do with what they were seeing. She held her chin level. She was Amara Okafor. She had been walking into rooms her entire life and rearranging them just by existing fully inside them. She had done it in Lagos and in London and in Seoul, and she was doing it now in black silk and gold embroidery, with the most dangerous man in the room warm beside her. Let them look. Let all of them look. She and Seojun moved through the gala with the ease of two people who had stopped performing their relationship and were simply living it. He kept her close, attentively, with awareness, the way you stay close to something that matters rather than something you own. And she felt the difference in her body the same way she had always felt the difference between his hands and Jihoon's hands. His hand at the small of her back when someone new approached, his body angled toward her when someone spoke to her directly. The specific quality of his attention, which was always tracking where she was. An hour into the evening, a woman found her near the east window, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, the posture of someone who had been powerful long enough to be comfortable in it. "You are the designer," the woman said. "The African-Korean fusion work. I have been following your label for 3 months." Amara turned to her fully. "You have?" "I want to commission a full collection," the woman said, without preamble. "For my flagship store in Cheongdam-dong. I have been looking for a designer who speaks both languages, African textile and Korean silhouette, without losing either in the translation. I have not found one until your work." Amara took the card the woman offered. She held it in both hands for a moment and thought about the Lagos client who had walked away. She thought about working late with a pattern that refused to resolve, and a chest full of something that had been quietly closing for 2 years before this city and this penthouse began to pry it back open. "Monday," Amara said. "I will call your office Monday." The woman smiled, satisfied, not surprised, and moved on. Amara turned and found Seojun directly behind her. He had heard everything. His eyes were on her face with those open, unguarded eyes, and the corner of his mouth was doing the thing she had been cataloguing since the second week. "I told you," he said quietly. "The Lagos client is a fool." She laughed. "The real one. The clean one. The one from the place that had been closed for a long time and was not closed anymore." He watched it move across her face like he was committing it to memory. Then Junho appeared at his shoulder. The warmth in the air shifted instantly. "He's here," Junho said, quiet and precise. "3rd floor. He brought 6 Yeon men. None of them are on the guest list." Seojun's hand moved from the small of her, back to her wrist, not grabbing, just present, just there. "How do you want to move?" Junho said. "We don't run," Seojun said. His voice had shifted into the operational register, clean and cold and absolute. "We finish what we came here to do." He looked at Amara. His eyes said everything his voice didn't. "Stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Jihoon came down the main staircase like he owned the building. Well-cut suit, careful grooming. He moved through the crowd with the specific confidence of someone who believed that arriving boldly enough was the same as being invited. His 6 men spread behind him with the practiced casualness of people trying to look like something other than what they were. Seojun's men were already repositioned. Amara felt the invisible geometry shifting, threats and counters arranging themselves in the space between the chandeliers and the marble floors, while 200 people kept eating and talking and performing completely, unaware that the room had become something else entirely. Jihoon found her across the floor. He walked directly toward them and stopped 5 feet away and looked at Seojun with the contempt of a man who had decided his enemy was less than him. Always the most dangerous kind of contempt because it made people miscalculate. "You brought her here," Jihoon said. "You put her on display like she is a statement." "She is not a statement," Seojun said, calm and absolute. "She is the person I chose. There is a difference. She doesn't belong in your world." "I am standing right here," Amara said. Both men looked at her. "I am not a conversation you have over my head," she said. "Either speak to me directly or don't speak at all." Jihoon turned to her, and the mask slipped, just at the edges, just enough. And she saw everything underneath it. The love that had never learned its own limits. The rage that lived inside the love like a current in water, invisible until it pulled you under. The absolute inability to understand that the depth of what he felt gave him no rights over the person he felt it for. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Right now. Walk away with me, and this ends tonight. No more of this. No more of him. Just come home." "No," she said. "Amara." "No, Jihoon." Steady. Warm. Completely final. Not tonight. Not ever again. And everything you have done since I left, the Yon faction, the man you hurt, the phone call, none of it has been love. I think somewhere underneath all of it you have always known that. His face tightened. He looked at Seojun, something calculated and furious moving through his eyes. He nodded once to his men, and the gala became a different kind of event entirely. The first movement came from Jihoon's right, one of his men driving towards Seojun fast and low, and Seojun moved to meet it with the economy she had seen in the penthouse, turning the man's momentum against him, and the impact sound cut through the nearest cluster of guests sharply enough that the room began to understand something was happening. Voices rose, people moved. Junho was already at the perimeter, his team containing the chaos before it consumed the whole floor. Amara moved, not toward the exit. She knew the exits. She had catalogued every single one the moment they walked in, the same way she had catalogued every exit in every room for 2 years. But she also saw what Seojun could not see from his position. 2 of Jihoon's men moving to flank him from the left while Junho was occupied on the right. The angle wrong, the gap real. Nobody between them and Seojun's exposed side except empty air. She picked up a heavy decorative vase from the nearest display surface. She crossed the room in 7 fast steps. She brought it down on the shoulder of the closest flanking man, with a force that surprised all 3 of them, including herself. The man went down hard. The second one turned toward her with the expression of someone recalculating their entire evening. And Seojun, who had seen her move from across the room with the peripheral awareness she had come to understand, was specifically and permanently calibrated to her location, was there in 3 steps, putting himself between her and the second man. And what he did to that man was fast and complete and left no room for discussion. He turned to her. His eyes went straight to her hands, her face, her arms, checking, the way he always checked. "The vase," she said, slightly breathless. I know I was supposed to stay." "You saw the flank," he said. "Yes." "You protected my left side." "Someone had to." He looked at her for 1 full second with something in his face that lived past every word she had tried to put to it, past protection and past attraction, and past the carefully controlled surface of a man who had placed a burial flower over his own heart. Something that was simply you specifically, nobody else. "Later," he said, and his voice had something warm in it in the middle of a fight. "We are going to talk about you hitting people with decorative objects." "Later," she agreed. He took her hand. They moved toward the staircase. Jihoon was waiting at the base of the stairs. He had not run. She had known he would not. He stood there alone now. His men dealt with, Junho's team closing in from the sides. And he looked at Amara and Seojun walking toward him hand in hand through the wreckage of his own plan, and he looked like a man finally standing inside the full cost of the choice he had made. Amara stepped forward, deliberately, consciously, because this was her conversation, and she had decided she was going to finish it herself. "It's over, Jihoon," she said. She stopped 10 feet from him. Her voice was not hard, not cold. The voice of a woman who had been through the fire and come out the other side, and was not afraid of the heat anymore. "Whatever you thought this was going to accomplish, it's over. I am not coming back. I was never going to come back. And every move you have made since I left has not been about love. It has been about not being able to accept that you lost something. And Jihoon," she paused, "you cannot lose what was never yours to keep. I was never yours to keep. I was only ever mine." Jihoon stared at her. The burning in his eyes shifted. Underneath it, something complicated surfaced. Something that might have been, finally and painfully, the beginning of understanding. "I loved you," he said. This time it came out like a confession instead of a claim. Something he was putting down rather than wielding. "I know," she said quietly. "In the only way you knew how. But the way you knew how was breaking me. And love that breaks the person it is aimed at has to stop, Jihoon. Even when it is real. Even when stopping it hurts. It has to stop." The staircase was completely silent. He looked at her for a long moment, then at Seojun, then back at her face. He closed his eyes, just for one moment, just long enough for something enormous and long-held to shift. When he opened them, the burning was lower, less certain of itself, less convinced it had the right to be certain. "Is he good to you?" he said, quietly. Just the question, just the thing underneath everything that had always been the real one. "Yes," she said, no hesitation, no qualification. "Yes, Ji-hoon, he is." Something in Ji-hoon's face let go. He went without resistance when Junho's men came for him. He walked between them without fighting, without posturing. And at the last moment he turned and looked at Amara one final time. Really looked at her. All of her. The full version of the woman he had spent 2 years trying to compress into something that fit his hands. And she held his gaze and let him look. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much. Then he was gone. Seojun did not let go of her hand until they were in the car. Then he turned to look at her and she was already looking at him, and Seoul was moving past the windows in long, streaming rivers of light, and neither of them spoke for the length of 3 full city blocks. "You stepped forward," he said. "It was mine to finish." "I know." A pause. The city moved. "I was ready to step in front of you." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I stepped forward first. Because I needed you to see me finish it. Not watch you finish it for me." He looked at her. The blonde streak had fallen forward. The crane was visible above his collar. His dark eyes in the moving light were fully open, the controlled surface completely gone. And he looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing he had come across in all the years he had been moving through a world full of things, trying to be extraordinary. "I see you," he said, low and certain and real. "I have seen you since the morning you woke up on the floor of that apartment and looked at 6 of my men like they were a minor, scheduling inconvenience." She laughed. That clean laugh, the real one. The one from the place that had been closed for 2 years and was not closed anymore. He watched it move across her face like he was committing it to memory for a time when he might need it. "Seojun," she said. The 6 months are over. The truce collapsed. The contract is void." She looked at him directly, completely. "So I need you to ask me. Not as a clause, not as an arrangement, not as any version of a deal. Ask me as yourself." He was quiet for a moment. The city kept moving. Seoul indifferent and luminous and enormous outside the glass. Then, "Stay." His voice was low and unhurried and completely his own. "Not for the contract. Not for the syndicate. Not for any reason I can put in a document. Stay because I walk past your studio every night, and I've stopped being able to imagine the penthouse without the light on under your door. Stay because you put tteokbokki on my desk and argued with my rules, and looked at 6 armed men like they were a scheduling conflict, and I have not been the same since any of it." He paused. "Stay, because 6 weeks ago I was in a convenience store while my assistant handled paperwork, and I did not turn around to look at you. I have thought about that every day since. I know now what I would have seen. I am asking you not to make me go back to not knowing." The car was completely still. "Kang Seojun," she said softly. "That is the best thing anyone has ever said to me in the back of a moving vehicle." He kissed her. Right there in the back seat with Seoul streaming past and the city lights moving across them like they were part of it, like they belonged to it. He kissed her the way he had kissed her in the hallway, certain and full and completely himself. And she kissed him back with everything she had run into the rain with, and everything she had built since, and everything she was still in the process of becoming. When the car pulled up to the building, she was still in his arms. She could feel the chrysanthemum under her palm through his shirt, and she pressed her hand flat against it, deliberately, intentionally, the way she had in the dark on the night everything shifted. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "Not a burial anymore," she said. He covered her hand with his. He held it there against his chest, over the flower, over his heart. "No," he said, "not anymore." 3 weeks later, the warehouse. She understood it now. standing in the rain and the rust smell and the 12 guns and Ji-hoon's voice asking her to choose. That every single thing from the convenience store to this moment had been in motion toward this. Every broken rule and every charged silence and every careful morning and every night she fell asleep without checking the exits. Every kiss and every hand in her hair, and every time he had stood between her and something that wanted to hurt her. She had thought the warehouse was the thing. She had to survive. She understood now that it was the thing she got to choose, and she had already chosen. She had chosen 3 weeks ago in the back of a car when she asked him to ask her as himself. She had chosen the morning she pressed her hand against the chrysanthemum and said not anymore. She had chosen the night she stopped locking her bedroom door and did not start again. Ji-hoon's voice was still in the room. Choose. Choose right now. And Amara Okafor was standing 6 feet from Kang Seojun in a warehouse in the rain. And she looked at him, and he was looking at her, only her, afraid of her answer. And she thought, "You have been afraid of the wrong thing this whole time." "You," she said, looking at Seojun, directly and completely. "I already chose. I chose weeks ago. I'm just saying it out loud now so everyone in this room can hear it." Seojun looked at her. Something crossed his face that she would think about for the rest of her life. The specific expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been allowed to set it down. Then the gun came up. Then he moved. Then the men came through the doors. And when it was over and the warehouse was quiet and the rain was easing on the roof and Junho's team was moving through the space, with efficient quiet, Seojun came to her directly, without detour, the way he always came to her. His hands found her face. His eyes moved over her, checking every part of her with the attention that had long since stopped being professional and had become something that had no category in the contracts he wrote or the operations he ran. "Done," he said. One word. Everything inside it. "Done," she said back. He pulled her in and both arms came around her fully, and she pressed her face against the chrysanthemum and listened to his heartbeat. Steady now, the heartbeat of a man who was not afraid anymore. And she held on to him in the middle of the emptying warehouse, while Seoul, outside, kept doing what Seoul always did, moving and humming and glittering, indifferent to everything except its own enormous life. She had come here running, barefoot in the rain with 60,000 won, and one earring and a passport pressed against her chest. She had signed 3 pages she did not read and woken up on a bare floor to a stranger at her kitchen table, who said her name like a fact he had already decided what to do with. She had not planned any of it. She had not planned one single breath of it, and it was the truest thing that had ever happened to her. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know what it cost her to get here. 2 years of shrinking, thousands of kilometers of running, and one wrong signature on a rainy night in a Seoul convenience store that turned out to be the most right thing she ever did. Some of you watching this right now are in the middle of your own version of that journey. You have not reached your ending yet, but you are moving. You are still going, and that matters more than you know. Drop your city in the comments right now. Let us see how far this story traveled today. Share it with someone who needs it. Someone who needs to be reminded that the things we do not plan can still save us. That being truly seen is still possible, even now, even after everything, even on the nights when you are just trying to survive until morning. Subscribe, because every week we come back here and we tell stories about women who choose themselves, even when it is hard, even when it is late, even when the version of themselves they are running toward feels impossibly far away. Amara Okafor chose herself in a warehouse in the rain with 12 guns in the room and 2 years of damage in her chest, and she did not flinch once. And so can you.